And then there's the Seacoast Echo in Hancock County, home of Coleman Avenue, the first stop for any person, including President Bush, trying to get a handle on the sheer destruction of the storm. This was ground zero. Just ask publisher, editor, paginator, printer, salesperson, and delivery boy Randy Ponder. Prior to the storm, the Seacoast Echo printed 48 pages in 4 sections. Their press was destroyed. The building was gutted. The paper was reduced to one 12-page section with precious few ads. His staff dwindled from 25 to 5 employees. The first edition of the Seacoast Echo was printed hundreds of miles away.
The primary reason we were able to do that is because my news editor, Mr. Jeff Belcher, had evacuated out of the area, and when he saw the massive amount of destruction that we had here, he knew that there was no way he would be able to return to the office within a few days. So he went to his home in Pikeville, Kentucky, contacted the local newspaper there. They provided him an office and computer. He was able to go on the internet and download information about the disaster and the effects here in Hancock County. They printed a 4-page newspaper for us, strictly local content, had it trucked here without the knowledge if we were alive or not. No one knew. There was no way to communicate with the outside world. They had the papers trucked here to my house, and when they were delivered to my house, my wife, myself, and my son were able to hand papers out to people. And that's how we got the first issue of the Seacoast Echo printed.
Each of those 5 papers has an incredible and unique story to tell. But while perhaps different in scale, numbers, locale, and circulation, each of their efforts focused on serving the remaining people on the Mississippi Gulf Coast.
The black's just to the left about 10, Todd. Let's go, Matthew. Get it. Go ahead.
Journalists are routinely called upon to cover tragedy. They swoop in, get the scoop, research, write, report, distribute, and get ready for the next story. But what happens when journalists are in the middle of the tragedy? Instincts take over. It's not about news, it's about survival, and there was no exception at any newspaper. Business took a backseat to being human, if only for a few hours. Randy Ponder has lived in Hancock County for about 30 years. His newspaper lies in the heart of downtown Bay St. Louis, 27 feet above sea level. Level 5 Hurricane Camille's water did not reach the paper in 1969. Thus, the Echo was considered by many, including employees and their family members and pets, to be a safe haven from Katrina. It wasn't.
If we had a 30-foot storm surge, and we obviously did, I knew the building had to have water. And I was just terribly concerned about what happened in that building. That had to be a nightmare.
That theme played over and over.
For me, it's, my neighborhood, there were a lot of people that died in my neighborhood. And I'll never forget pulling out of it that Sunday afternoon before we came over here and kind of bedded down for the evening. I would never forget how many people were still there. Some of them left afterwards and some of them didn't, and a lot of them that didn't, they died.
It was very difficult and chaotic because we didn't know where people were. We wanted to know that everyone was safe.
That was my first realization that we had really been hit hard. Was my house is not in the flood zone, but I had 3.5 foot of water in the garage. So I was very concerned about what the entire community is going to be like after that.
There were no fatalities among newspaper employees, but some lost family members to Katrina. Dozens lost their homes and apartments. Many lost their most important possessions. And even those who lost nothing lost plenty. It is impossible to meet anyone on the coast who doesn't know someone who wasn't devastated by the hurricane. Chaos reigned in the days following the storm. Missing persons, rescue and recovery, temperatures in the mid-90s, no air conditioning, no electricity for that matter for the most part, inadequate shelter, food, and water, very little information. What happened? What is happening? What will happen? Where would those answers come from? The Coast newspapers stepped up. Despite having to deal with their own very real problems and very big problems, the employees went to work around the clock. Papers got printed in different cities. Major problems were whittled into workable ones. Most important commodities, news and information, would be provided. Instead of printing fewer newspapers, publishers printed more than usual. The delivery method was hand to hand. The price for the paper in the early days, free. While journalism is a business, commerce had little to do with what happened next.
Afterwards, the shelters were so full, and I would take bundles. I'd pull through there, and it was like they'd come out to my car to help me unload the bundles because they just wanted that paper. They wanted to know what was going on, where they needed to go to do this, where did they need to go to apply for this, and what was going to happen tomorrow.
There was such a rush to our vehicle. My husband was assisting me, and throngs of people coming to our vehicle and, reaching for the paper. Everybody, and they went so quickly. And we didn't have enough.
I'd go into a convenience store and take a stack of papers, and people would mob me for the papers. They would just grab the papers. In this business, we know that a newspaper is important to the community. But before this hurricane, I actually never understood just how important.
Day after day, week after week, each newspaper staff pressed on against crazy odds. Some newspapers brought in reinforcements. Some relied on family members to pitch in. Everyone became a reporter. However, covering the news full-time and nonstop had a price. In addition to work, employees had their own personal troubles. Commonplace were anxiety, worry, exhaustion, and depression. Sun-Herald editor Stan Tyner learned about post-traumatic stress syndrome from his experience as a soldier in Vietnam. Call it what you will, the storm affected journalists.
We had people that were literally going out to cover the story and discovering what they feared, that their house was totally gone. And they came back. That's not normal. You don't normally, on August 29th, when people went out of their house, we had at least 4 or 5 of our people in the first 2 hours or something that were able to go out and discover their homes were gone. That's not normal. You normally don't have 5 people discovering slabs where houses used to sit.
Everyone thought Camille was the storm to end all storms. And now we have Katrina, which was the storm to end all storms.
Everything was gone on this coast. There was nothing that, I think that's really how some people dealt with some things fairly decently, because everything was gone.
Hurricane Katrina destroyed probably 85% or more of those businesses. They just simply aren't here.
We've had some, ups. I'm not going to lie to you. We've had a lot of downs too. There's times when people just couldn't go, and you could tell they couldn't go, and you had to say, why don't you go home and stay a couple days?
Taking care of oneself became a matter of survival. People at the 5 newspapers on the coast turned inward and toward each other.
And yes, it does make you closer. We always were a good team because we're small. When you're a small operation, there is that sense of family because we're small. But it's even more so now because we have been through a lot together. And that adversity brings you closer together.